Before we talk about power, let me ask you something uncomfortable. If someone could watch your thoughts for 24 hours, not your actions, your thoughts, what would they see? Clarity, direction, purpose, or repetition, distraction, recycled worries? We assume we are thinking consciously, but most of the time we are reacting internally, and that distinction matters more than we realize. In 1907, William Walker Atkinson wrote Mind Power, and he didn't begin with encouragement. He began with a challenge. He claimed that the mind is not passive, it is dynamic, it is force, and if that is true, then your internal structure matters more than your external circumstances. That is not a motivational idea, that is a structural one. Chapter 1. The Mental Dynamo. The book opens with a bold declaration in Chapter 1, The Mental Dynamo. Atkinson proposes that there exists a universal mental principle, a dynamic force permeating everything. Now pause. You don't have to accept the cosmic scale of that argument, but think smaller. Every action in your life begins with thought. Before you speak, thought. Before you withdraw, thought. Before you hesitate, thought. Before you commit, thought. Thought precedes movement. Movement repeated becomes behavior. Behavior accumulated becomes results. So whether or not mind moves atoms, it certainly moves you, and that alone makes this idea powerful. Atkinson calls this universal force an ocean of mind power, but here's the important shift. You are not separate from it, you participate in it. The question becomes, are you participating consciously or automatically? Chapters 2 and 3, The Nature of Mind Power. In the next chapters, he narrows the idea from universal to personal. He explains that this mental force expresses itself in human beings through three primary channels: desire, will, imagination. Let's slow down here. Desire is easy. You desire success, health, recognition, peace, stability. Everyone desires. But desire alone creates nothing. How many things have you deeply wanted, but never consistently pursued? That's where will enters. Will is sustained direction, not excitement, not emotional intensity. Direction, maintained over time. Most people live in cycles of desire without trained will, and that produces frustration, because potential without direction feels like internal tension. Now, imagination. Imagination is the architect. It builds internal blueprints. You rehearse scenarios all day, arguments you might have, things that might go wrong, things you're afraid of, conversations that haven't happened, and your nervous system responds to those rehearsals. Your body does not fully distinguish between vividly imagined experience and physical reality. So if imagination is constantly rehearsing fear, your physiology adapts to fear. If imagination constantly rehearses failure, your behavior subtly prepares for it. Atkinson understood this over a century ago. Imagination is not entertainment. It is preparation. Chapter 3. Mentative Induction. Then comes something fascinating. He introduces the concept of mentative induction. In simple language, minds influence other minds. You've felt this. You walk into a room and sense tension immediately. No one has spoken, but the atmosphere is heavy. Or you meet someone calm, grounded, and your breathing slows without effort. That's mental atmosphere. Atkinson argues that every individual radiates a mental climate, not mystical energy, coherence. If your thoughts are scattered, your presence feels scattered. If your thoughts are aligned, your presence feels stable. Now here's the uncomfortable part. You are broadcasting constantly. Your posture, your tone, your pacing, your micro-expressions all reflect internal organization. And people respond to that organization instinctively, not consciously, instinctively. Chapters are 7 terts. Desire versus will and personal magnetism. As the book progresses, Atkinson returns repeatedly to one core distinction. Desire is not will. Desire begins. Will sustains. Most people experience intense desire. Few cultivate sustained will. And without sustained will, imagination drifts. Focus dissolves. Effort collapses. This is where he introduces personal magnetism. But this isn't charisma. It isn't manipulation. It isn't theatrical confidence. It is integration. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align, there is no internal contradiction, no hesitation in tone, no collapse in posture, no confusion in direction. That creates gravity. Think about the strongest person you know. They're rarely the loudest. They're steady. Steadiness builds trust. Trust builds influence. Influence is not forced. It emerges from consistency. Atkinson's argument is subtle but powerful. Internal disorder leaks externally. Internal order radiates externally. And that is something you can train. Chapters 15 to 18. Suggestion. Then the book moves into something even more relevant today. Suggestion. Atkinson explains that suggestion shapes belief and behavior, not just hypnotic suggestion, everyday suggestion, media, friends, cultural narratives, authority figures, but the most powerful suggestion, self-suggestion, the quiet repetition in your own mind. I can't stay disciplined. I'm not good at this. I always mess things up. These are not harmless thoughts. They are repeated instructions, and repetition forms identity. Identity guides behavior automatically. If you believe you are inconsistent, you behave in ways that confirm inconsistency. And here's the structural danger. Unconscious repetition feels like truth. Atkinson's warning is clear. If you do not consciously guide suggestion, you will unconsciously absorb it. And unconscious absorption creates automatic patterns, which feel like personality, but are actually habit. The transition to part 2. By this point in the book, something becomes clear. Mind is not weak. Mind is not neutral. Mind is dynamic. It is always building, always reinforcing, always shaping. The only question is, are you directing it or reacting with it? In part 2, we'll go deeper into mental protection, mental healing, mental architecture, and the reconstruction of self, because once you understand that mind is force, the next question becomes unavoidable. What structure are you building with it? And that is where responsibility becomes real. Mind is dynamic. It is not idle. It is not neutral. It is not passive. It is always shaping something. Now comes the harder question. If mind is force, what happens when it is unprotected? What happens when it is undirected? Because power without structure doesn't create strength. It creates instability. And this is where Atkinson shifts the conversation. Chapters 15. Mental atmosphere and channels of influence. Atkinson deepens his analysis of mental atmosphere. He argues that influence operates through channels, not mystical beams, human channels, tone of voice, posture, expression, gesture, confidence in movement. The body becomes an instrument of mental expression. Think about this in your own life. When you feel uncertain, your shoulders change. When you feel confident, your breathing changes. When you feel defeated, your eyes lower. Mental states shape physical expression, and physical expression feeds back into mental state. It's a loop. He understood something we now call embodied cognition. Your mental order affects your physical signal. Your physical signal reinforces your mental order, which means if you change nothing consciously, the loop runs automatically. But if you intervene, you can alter the loop. That is practical power. Chapters 16-20. Induced imagination and suggestion. Now Atkinson dives deeper into imagination. He explains that suggestion works not because of magic, but because imagination accepts images as instruction. When someone repeatedly describes you as weak, and you imagine yourself as weak, your body responds accordingly. When you internally rehearse capability, your posture adjusts, your tone stabilizes, your decisions shift. This is not fantasy. This is rehearsal. You are constantly rehearsing who you are. The danger is unconscious rehearsal. The opportunity is deliberate rehearsal. Atkinson describes induced imagination, how external suggestion plants internal imagery. And if you don't guard that imagery, it becomes blueprint. Let me ask you something personal. What image of yourself have you been carrying for years? Is it accurate or inherited? Chapters 20 the ocean and mental self-protection. Then he returns to the metaphor of the ocean of mind power. But this time, the focus changes. He discusses self-protection. If influence exists, defense must exist. Because mental contagion is real. Anxiety spreads, negativity spreads, outrage spreads faster than calm. Without an internal center, you absorb everything. And absorption without filtration leads to exhaustion. He suggests strengthening the mental center. That means clear purpose, emotional regulation, independent judgment. This is not isolation, it is sovereignty. In a world full of competing signals, mental sovereignty is rare, but without it you become reactive, and reactive living feels like loss of control. Chapters Ganpigi Batista C. Mental Therapeutics. Atkinson also addresses mental healing. Now this is where many readers either lean in or pull away. He argues that mental states influence physical states. Modern science now confirms part of this. Stress affects immunity. Belief affects performance. Emotion affects recovery. He did not have modern neuroscience, but he observed something simple. Mental tension creates physical tension. Mental calm creates physiological shift. He does not say ignore medicine. He says mental condition matters. And here's the real takeaway. If your thoughts constantly generate stress chemistry, your body adapts to stress. If your thoughts constantly generate hope and stability, your body adapts to stability. Mind and body are not enemies. They are partners. Chapter 29, Mental Architecture. Now we reach one of the strongest metaphors in the book, mental architecture. Architecture is deliberate. It requires blueprint, structure, consistency. He argues that the mind builds identity brick by brick, thought by thought, reaction by reaction. There is no dramatic transformation, there is accumulation. You don't wake up confident, you rehearse confidence. You don't wake up disciplined, you reinforce discipline. And here's something important. You also don't wake up insecure, you reinforce insecurity. Architecture does not judge, it reflects repetition. So the real question becomes, what have you been reinforcing? Chapter Stint's Fate, Making Over Oneself. This chapter is about reconstruction. And this is where the book becomes deeply human. He acknowledges that people feel stuck, that habits feel permanent, that identity feels fixed. But he insists, nothing built through repetition is immune to new repetition. That is both comforting and confronting. It means you are not trapped, but you are responsible. Rebuilding requires sustained effort, not inspiration, not bursts of emotion, consistency. Most people start rebuilding themselves, then stop when excitement fades. But structure requires continuity. Chapter 29's Mind Building. The final chapter synthesizes everything. Mind building is not about fantasy. It is about strengthening, attention, will, emotional control, directed imagination, self-protection, consistency. He doesn't end with spectacle, he ends with discipline. And that is what makes this book enduring, because it removes illusion. It says, you already possess mental force. The question is not whether you have power. The question is whether you are organizing it. Final reflection. Let's bring this back to you. Right now, your mind is active. It is generating images, judgments, predictions, memories. It is shaping how you feel, shaping how you respond, shaping what you believe is possible. That is happening whether you are conscious of it or not. So here is the real question that Mind Power leaves you with. Are your mental patterns inherited or chosen? Are you reacting or directing? Because if mind is dynamic, then you are never neutral. You are always building something. And architecture built unconsciously feels like fate. Architecture built consciously feels like strength. That is the quiet message of this book. Not magic, not fantasy, structure. And structure, sustained over time, becomes power.